Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to wait a couple more minutes before we get started to allow a few more people to jump in. Have a message from Harmony. Hello, everyone. Thanks for putting the event together. Excited to be here. Thanks, Harmony. I'm glad to have you here. I'm happy to see some really excited IO grad students hoping to learn from each other and just more broadly about the field in general. I also, because we will be doing a little bit of networking later, if anyone wants to put in their LinkedIn bios into the chat, and maybe people could also kind of get to know each other outside of the event afterwards, I'd recommend doing that too. Oh, I like your energy. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Anu? Did I say it right? You might be on mute. There's a J at the end. Anuj? Is that better? I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. I have an unique name as well, and people butcher it a lot.
Anuj is perfect.
Anuj, I got it. Thank you. Well,
Yep,
I like your energy. Thanks for bringing it. V, great to have you here also. All right, so I think I'll go ahead and get started. We have a little bit of an introduction to get us going. So thanks everyone for attending our event today on Grad School Tips and Tricks Networking event. We have today 4 panelists for our moderated Q&A portion: Rachel Bravo, Nathan Iverson, Taylor Kimball, and Karina Rodriguez. When you all registered for the event and submitted questions, we really got a diverse range of questions. So things like how to be successful in grad school, what are career opportunities with an IO degree, and even just how to network in a virtual world. So we've purposefully put in some questions, and we think our panelists, given their experience, will be able to answer those for you. To tell you a little bit more about who we are, my name is Sevelin Van Ronk. I am the author of the children's book, My Mommy is an Organizational Psychologist. So when I was finishing up my master's degree, starting my PhD, I really became passionate about teaching the general public about industrial organizational psychology. One way I wanted to do that was to create a children's book, which honestly can be used for people of all ages. Since creating the book, I have partnered with Amelia and Karina as my teammates, and we've held webinars, we've been on podcasts, we've been in PsyOp conference, newsletter, and even a Psychology Today article. So our broader purpose is teaching people about IO and then also helping our IO community. Next slide, Amelia. And that is really what brought us to this event, is helping our IO community. So if you are an incoming grad student, or you've already been a grad student for a couple of years, you might find these memes a little relatable. But in general, what we're hoping you can learn today is really how to be successful and get to know other IOs inside your program or outside of the program. For today's session, we'll spend about 30 minutes doing a moderated Q&A with the panelists, and then we're going to do some breakout rooms. And if you're a little fearful of networking in a virtual atmosphere, don't leave, stay in the event, because we'll have our panelists in the breakout rooms for you to ask follow-up questions. And we'll also be putting some fun prompts in there to help get the conversation started if you feel there's some awkward silence. The last thing I want to say before we get started is how you can support me and my team is to actually really support the book. So if you liked what you did, or if you liked what you were part of today, you can go and purchase one of our books or gift it to another IO. And we do have a book promo of grad school tips for 25% off. And if you're not really ready to purchase a book yet, but you want to show some support, you can go to our social media pages and follow us, which is where you can also stay up to date for future events. All right, with that said, I think I'll go ahead and hand it over to Amelia, who's going to be our moderator for today. And I think she's going to start by first asking our panelists to do a brief introduction. Although you've already read so much about them, we'll start with that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sevlin, and thank you everybody for taking some time to join us this afternoon. As Sevlin mentioned, I am a part of the MMIOP, or My Mommy is an Organizational Psychologist team, and we are excited to be able to host this. So I'd like to first start by asking each of the panelists to kind of just give a brief bio, any highlights, education. Taylor, did you want to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Taylor Kimball, and I am a fourth-year PhD student in organizational behavior at Claremont Graduate University. So there I'm a research associate, and my research interests lie in leader development, women's leadership, and leader identity. And I'm also a consulting project manager and evaluation project manager for various projects throughout the university and with other schools as well.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Karina, would you like to go next?
Yes, I'm Karina Rodriguez, and I am a CSU SB student. I see some familiar faces here. Thanks for joining. And I am on, like I said, I'm on my first year, going into my second, and I do look forward to doing my PhD eventually. I'm not sure if it'll be in IO, but I will be going down the PhD route.
Thank you. Dr. Iverson?
Hello, I'm Dr. Nathan Iverson. I own Momentum Coaching and Consulting, and I direct the grad program in IO at Cal Baptist University.
Thank you. And last but not least, Rachel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel. I got my master's in IO at Cal State San Bernardino about 4 years ago. So now I've just been spending all that time really just working out in the field and trying to figure out, what is it that I want to do? So I'm now currently a learning and development specialist at a small firm in downtown LA.
Perfect. Thank you all. So we thought we'd start with kind of a little bit of an icebreaker question that could apply to anybody here. But for our panelists, how did you get into IO? And what do you, well, we've already explained what you do now. So what was your path to actually finding IO?
Hi, I can start first. So my undergraduate degree is neuropsychology, and at first I kind of leaning towards the neurobios, but then I got a chance to do like a co-ops, collaborate with a MyPlay company. So is basically a company that focus on motivations for students learning science. So that is my first time to do like a qualitative analysis and get like a first start with motivations and part of IO psychologies. So at that moment I feel like I like more leaning towards the behaviors and probably motivations and engagements. So I start leaning toward my career with the IO psychologies and with the HR fields as well. So I'm currently working as an L&D for TikTok, and I will start my PhD next year, which is 2022, as host right in New York.
Oh, okay, thank you so much for sharing, Bai, and my apologies. We'll go ahead and share some more information about each other during the networking session. So I'll direct it back to the panelists and we can share a little bit more later. So how about Karina, how did you get interested in IO and what made you pursue graduate school in IO?
I actually took an undergrad class that it was called Careers in Psychology. And that was my first exposure to IO. And then I also have had some very poorly managed jobs in the past. And I just thought that I wanted to be a part of changing that culture for other people.
Thank you. Any other panelists for that question of how did you get into IO?
For me, I had no plan of psychology. I think for me, it was, I thought like many of us, psychologists are only the people kind of like that meme, you know, you go to for special help. And I knew I maybe didn't have the bandwidth or length of empathy to do that. Maybe my friends and family, but that's it, not 9 to 5. I was serving in Mongolia and it was the coldest winter in 30 years. It was 100 below zero with the wind chill. And while there, I came back, everything I believed just was like thrown out the window, and I had to reconcile some really difficult questions. And I came home basically saying I can forget the things I saw or spend the rest of my life trying to find some answers, and found out I was really asking IO questions like, how do you avoid burnout? How do you select people most likely to succeed to serve in difficult jobs and locations? And that's what we're doing now. And now I get to equip our grad students, right, to spread that vision around the world each year.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Iverson. Rachel or Taylor? Perfect. We'll go ahead and move on to the next question. And these were questions that were submitted by some of our attendees. So for Karina and Taylor, what are the top things first and second year students should focus on in the beginning of their program?
Sure, I can start this one. So for me, what I found most important, and this maybe is a little more applicable to PhD students since it's a longer tenure in grad school, but for me, it's just building that relationship with your research academic advisor, just so you know you have that connection, because you're going to be with them the whole time, and they're really going to be the ones, you know, connecting you with opportunities and facilitating your research and being kind of that guiding light throughout your program. So I think trying to form that strong connection early was the most significant thing in my first year, at least, because now my advisor is my biggest resource, and you know, she's been at the school for a long time, so she knows how to navigate the system and has connected me with her research lab, which is such a strong community. And I think that those interpersonal connections are really also what get you through what can sometimes be a slog, you know, of this years-long program. So you need something to sustain you. And I really believe that those relationships are the key to that. So that would be my one piece of advice.
Absolutely. Thank you. Karina?
Yes, kind of to go with what Taylor said, I was going to say, get to know all of the members in all of the professors in your program, and just kind of figure out who you feel you will work best with. And don't worry too much about finding that internship directly right in the first semester. I know I was freaking out about it, and it's not that important in that first semester to worry about. Just focus more on building the connection with your professors, finding one that you feel comfortable with to work with, like their communication style has to match yours and stuff like that. And then I would also say, since it is the master's program and you are going from undergrad to master's program, you are going to feel very overwhelmed. And don't forget about self-care, because that's very important. We all forget about it because we're so wrapped up. We want to do a lot, but we forget that we can't do much of anything if we're not feeling healthy or not feeling focused. So self-care, don't forget that.
Yes, absolutely. I think you both make great points. Finding people who you can connect with and then using them as a support system is a great way to both help yourself while pursuing that, but also not get burnt out, so you have that support system. Thank you. So our next question is for Rachel. Is it better to get an internship or a job position while being halfway through the master's program, or do you think applying early on is a better route?
Well, I think it really depends, right? The classic phrase. So one, you know, if you have the support at home to be able to do kind of temporary work and maybe, you know, not make as much as you'd like, I definitely think that the internships are the best way to go. I think going back to what Karina was saying, you know, I think that first semester, don't feel like you need to already start looking for work. I think as you start completing coursework, you'll start finding what the things that you're interested in. And then I think from there, if your program allows you the time too, as well, to do internships and maybe full-time work, you know, start really looking at roles that align with those interests, because you don't want to get stuck in a role that you really do not like. And so the great part about internships is just you get to see how different organizations work, and you get different types of experiences and really kind of refining those interests within IO.
Yes, it's a great time for explorations. I totally agree with that. So next for Dr. Iverson, what kind of jobs do you recommend for somebody early on in their IO or OD career?
I think for most of us, it's imposter syndrome is the thing we need to overcome the quickest. If you're a graduate, if you have a graduate degree, you're in an elite group, right? You're in the top 5% of society. Most of us don't come from that if we just randomly select from town, right? So most of us, we look at, and myself, I grew up on a farm in rural America, like everyone sweated for a living. So I looked at grad school and said, I am not like these people, I don't belong here. That's most of my students too. So most of us come in thinking I only can work at Starbucks. I only can do these kind of jobs. I encourage students as soon as you can, quit your Starbucks, your Amazon warehouse job, and transition to something that starts building your resume, because most of the interesting IO jobs require 3 to 5 years of relevant experience. So as soon as you can clock in on that, even if you're not paid, even if it takes student loans, because the sooner you do that, the sooner you triple your salary. And that's just the fact of it, right? IO psychologists make a bit of money. You don't if you're a barista.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It can be hard to kind of separate from that, but thinking long-term and aligning your current goal or your current actions with your future goals is really important. So, great point. So next up, for Karina and Taylor, what do you think are the most important skills or knowledges that you've picked up during your IO and OD education? And the second part to that is, how have you improved your writing skills? I know that's a big part of grad school.
I can go first on this one. So for me, my statistics was very much enhanced during this program because my program is very statistic based, and I was able to learn way more than I did in my undergrad. My undergrad statistics class was a joke. This is real. You're gonna learn a lot, and it's very enjoyable. It's a little hard, but it's enjoyable. And then I also learned a lot of virtual collaboration since I was during the pandemic, I had to do it through Zoom. So managing that with everybody else's schedule, I learned how to do that. And that's pretty important because there's a lot of remote jobs right now that require you to be able to collaborate virtually. And the second portion of your question on how I strengthen my writing skills, I feel like we're going to learn from seeing other academic journals. I've had to read so many of them. I'm sure you guys have too. So just I've picked up on writing skills from those authors and how they write. And also master's program is pretty much writing. So you're going to do it a lot, and it's going to work for you. You're going to get better at it. I do use Grammarly though. I don't know if that's something you guys would like, and I feel like it helps you, but don't rely too much on it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Karina said. So I'll do the second part first. Just improving your writing skills. It's just by reading a lot, and you're going to be doing that either way, and just really like diving into a lot of academic journal articles and just familiarizing yourself with how IO psychologists write. That way will really improve your writing. And then also, just based on the work you have to produce through your program, just ask for feedback. And the more you are open with your partial work or your work that's not that good, and sharing it with people and getting the feedback sooner and throughout the whole process, your writing is just going to improve through that as well. And that's been the biggest thing for me, because I definitely am that person who has a tendency to hide things, until they're perfect, and then I'll show somebody. And that's just not how you learn, how you grow. And so grad school has really pushed me to ask for feedback more often. And I think that that's been the biggest thing that's improved my writing. So it's not just all on my shoulders, I'm getting that support from experts, basically. And then the first part of the question, important skills or knowledge I've picked up. I'd say the biggest thing is just basically how to do research. It's not something that I really ever encountered in undergrad. And so just doing that whole process from, just a lit review, like really diving into what exists already, designing your own research questions and hypotheses, and like coming up with your own methods, executing them, collecting data, analyzing data, the whole process is just, it's really big and it takes a lot of time. And just going through that multiple times while you're in the program really, I think, just improves your critical thinking, your adaptability, everything that you need basically for any kind of long-term projects that you will be working on throughout your career. You get through that research process, I think. And so, yeah, that's definitely a core of all of these programs. And also, I think probably just the most important set of skills, and it kind of encompasses a lot. So that would be mine.
Yeah, thank you both. I think that those, they seem so natural when you're in school, and sometimes it's hard to think of how that translates into work, but being able to create a project plan or be able to kind of critically think about those things and then put into paper, put into an email, how that relates, all of those things are really applicable to the workplace as well. So our next question is for Dr. Iverson. What opportunities are there for somebody with an MA or an MS versus a PhD?
That's a challenging one because some of it depends on the program. Like references to CSUSB's program, in my opinion, that's a doctoral program in 2 years, right? You have the stats as good as like any doctoral program. So it's more about the skill set. And there is a little bit East Coast, West Coast difference here. On the East Coast, then education matters more and a title gets you in the door. On the West Coast, we're the home of Facebook, Amazon, of people who dropped out of college, right? And are richest people in the country, and particularly West Coast. So on the West Coast, I think it's really about the skill set. In either one, you're only employable if you have a skill set. I think that's something that is challenging for some students, is a couple letters behind your name does not give you a job. Networking and experience, it's like this trifecta, right? Networking, experience, and education. You need to be ideally equally strong in all of them. So if you don't know people, you're not getting a job. If you don't have experience, you're not getting a job. And in many cases in IO, if you don't have an education. So typically though, the short answer is if you have a PhD, you'll have the opportunity to be more specialized. You'll probably have more opportunity for more stats heavy jobs and opportunity for tenure track faculty positions if you want it. The vast majority of IO jobs you can do with either.
Great, thank you. So our next question is for Rachel. Do you have any helpful tips and suggestions for finding successfully working, my apologies, in a remote IO psych position?
Yeah, so I think for the first part, in terms of the finding the work, I think Dr. Iverson alluded to it very well in the chat where he mentioned, that using LinkedIn, I always encourage LinkedIn. So your profile is your living resume. Make it look good. Spend time on that. And two, take the time to reach out to people. I've had countless people reach out to me and just ask me like, hey, can I just have 30 minutes of your time? Because I really want to know more about, how did you get to where you're at? What do I do as a student or someone interested? Like where do I start? So I definitely think leverage LinkedIn. I've gotten plenty of jobs from LinkedIn, whether it was internships and a couple of full-time positions. So I love that platform. And then also for, let's see, what was it? It was how to be successful in a remote IO position, right? So, I don't know if it would be different for other jobs, in terms of working remotely in an IO position. I think it's, I think the biggest thing is you're leading by example. A lot of times people are not familiar with what IO is. They don't really understand your skill set, which I have found when I've gone into industries that don't have a lot of people like us and working in those organizations. So I think, when you're promoting ways to improve someone's culture, to work better as a team, opportunities or things, for I don't know, whether it's culture or trainings or things like that, they look at you as the leader in that. And so you have to be able to lead by example. So how to work collaboratively, making sure you have professional backgrounds, being very, asking a lot of questions. I think that's been the biggest thing working remotely is you don't want to walk out of a meeting and be like, wait, what was I supposed to do this or was I supposed to do that? You always want to ask questions. And when we're working remotely, you always want to communicate more just to make sure that you're on the right path. Because I think for me, I love research. And so I can get caught in this rabbit hole of analyzing all different types of ways to do something. So I think, just being clear on the expectations set before you and making sure that, you're walking the talk.
Yes, definitely. Implementing those IO, seeking feedback and communicating effectively. So there's a question in the chat that I think relates to both this question and the question we just posed to Dr. Iverson. So what if you're interested in more consulting roles? Does that necessitate a PhD? And if not, how can those of us with an MA or a master's degree find jobs and gain experience? I don't know if either of you want to speak to that.
I can say for myself and my contacts, the program I went through at Seattle Pacific, we had master's and PhD students taking half of our classes together. And a similar percentage in both went into consulting. Some boutique firms, it seems the trend I've noticed, a small sample size, right? But with dozen graduates a year, but the boutique firms are more likely to hire PhD because they have specializations like selection. You need a PhD, crazy level, good stats, because you're going to get sued otherwise. I worked at Slalom Consulting, the #1 consulting firm to work for, according to Consulting Magazine. And at Slalom, my manager had her PhD in IO. She didn't put it on her signature. She didn't tell anyone because she didn't want people to think that she was overqualified or in the clouds. So it depends a lot on the culture of the consulting firm. And my short answer again is boutique firms, it's more likely a PhD is recommended.
Thank you. Rachel, anything to add to that since you have experience consulting?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the sense of it really depends on the culture, because there are some firms that aren't going to be as interested as closely supervising you and really trying to allow you to learn on the job. Whereas I was very fortunate, both Seb and I were very fortunate to land in a firm where we were kind of didn't have much experience. And so we were able to do a lot of learning on the job. And it was kind of like, okay, go meet with this client. Like our bosses don't need to be there. And it's like, what do you mean? Like, we've only been doing this for like 1 or 2 years. But so yeah, I think it really depends on the culture and whether or not, there's room for you to learn on the job. Because we had people who didn't even have their master's yet, but they were, leading projects and meeting with clients and their employees. And yeah, and we did really well.
Thank you. So the final question we have here that we collected, and I'll open up to the audience in a minute, but for Dr. Iverson, what recommendations do you have to effectively make virtual connections that can lead to job opportunities or mentorship?
I love a quote from Nelson Mandela that says, "I never lose, I either win or learn." And right, many IO psychologists were big fans of Carol Dweck. My claim to fame is I walked into her office at Stanford and she asked me what my research was about. I almost fainted. So Carol Dweck in the psychology department at Stanford says not yet. So effective, you don't say I can't do it, you say I can't do it yet. So I think it's, as competitive, high achieving people, that's really hard for us to say not yet, because we're not used to losing. We love getting A+. In networking, if we can take the same approach, even in hanging out with someone, like if you go out for drinks with someone, grab coffee or drink, and then afterwards, tendency for most of us is we go away and like, bleep, 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 I messed it up. I'm an idiot. That negative self-talk, Carol Dweck would say, I didn't do it yet. So if we take the same thing on networking, it means reach out to 10, 20 people, expect this like 5% return rate. Reach out to 20 people. If 3 get back and you actually get coffee with 1, you're winning. So I think for me, that's the secret to networking, and make it fun. Every city I visit, like if I visited family in Minneapolis, it's a huge IO city. I reached out to all the people that I saw had cool jobs on the SciUp white pages. asked them all out, maybe 30 people out for coffee. 4 responded, 2 were available. After one of the coffee dates, right? The other, I said, who else would you recommend talking to? And someone at Target Corporate then connected me to someone at Best Buy Corporate in an IO role. And I got to be on corporate campuses of 2 top, Fortune 500s, simply by saying, I think you're interesting. Could I buy you coffee?
Yes, I love that. I think as IOs, most of us tend to, maybe even for those of us who may be a little reserved, once you get us talking about our research topic or something we're interested in, that's such a great tip. So from the chat, what are some of the best ways to learn about the culture of a firm during your job search or career development stages to find the right fit?
Yeah, I was just writing up a response. So I would say, definitely leverage the information that you can find like on their website. So for example, they might say like, yeah, we have opportunities for you to do learning on the job. Maybe they'll talk maybe a little bit about their training or kind of what they do to set up their employees for success. And then also too, again, reiterating a lot of what Dr. Iverson is saying is find someone that works at that organization and just really ask questions about their experience there and make sure, you're thoughtful in your questions. So that way you're pulling information that is going to allude to what the culture is like.
Absolutely, thank you. So I'll open it up to some audience questions. It looks like there's one more here that I can ask, and then feel free to unmute. This question is from Harmony. So it says, I will be going the thesis route for my master's. What are some good tips to help zero in on your topic?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because I personally went into the PhD immediately after undergrad. And so I didn't necessarily have like a niche that I knew I wanted to research or get into. So what I did to kind of help me pick out my thesis topic, I relied a lot on my advisor. And so, I had a lot of conversations with her to kind of get into more what I was interested in. And then also just reading a lot. And then you're going to find 1 or 2 articles that you're just like, wow, like this is amazing. I really like what they did here. I want to continue this. And then at the end of the article, they have their future research directions. And that's just like a perfect place to start, So you see like what these great minds who have already been published, like where they think this is going. And then you can take that and run with it for your own topic and kind of incorporate, other things that you're interested in with that as well.
Thank you, Taylor. Any other panelists want to weigh in on that one? How do you zero in on the many amazing topics that we research?
Advice that was given to me that's annoying advice my dissertation took like 2 years. It took forever. But the average person takes 10 years. So if you're below that, you're doing good. A good dissertation is a done dissertation. So we all have our passions. We all have our like pet interests. For me, it's like cross-cultural studies and efficacy. You can weave those into it, but if you can, use data that's already there. So I ended up getting connected to a consulting firm that wanted a publishing. I got them a publishing in the UK. And then once I got them published, they just handed me over this beautiful data set of 10 years, 73 nations, 2,800 people. My dissertation was basically done then. I had this beautiful data set, just had to write it up. So if you can use archival data, then there's no IRB board, nothing. So that's kind of like the secret back loop. It's not an option for everyone, but reach out, or if your internship has data, there's a lot of different routes about it.
Yeah, great advice, especially with the data collection process now. It can be a little harder with the virtual round. Perfect. And then another question, what subfields or subtopics do you see growing into IO in the coming years?
I can say just, I guess, from SciOps updates as a professor, right? I follow the SciOps recommendations for IO programs. So those of you looking at programs, make sure you choose one that follows SciOps recommendations on what a program should be. And one they just added, I think 3 years ago, was cross-cultural competencies. So I think that's showing this broadening that preceded, like, I think that preceded Black Lives Matter, that preceded like Oscar's so white, like that. So I think cross-cultural / now justice-oriented topics are definitely the future. Friends of mine at Deloitte say they can't staff D&I teams fast enough.
Yeah, I think definitely a huge opportunity for IO Psych. I know in my background, what I'm currently doing, working with medical professionals, that's huge, and finding professionals who can train and speak to that, even being able to offer continuing education units and credits for that is something that fits in really nicely with the IO field. Perfect. So any other questions for our panelists before we move into breakout rooms from our attendees?
I want to hear other people's thoughts on what they think it is new. I'm only one person. Like, Rachel, you're in practice consulting. What do you think? And Taylor, you're
Yeah.
deep in the research as a PhD student.
Yeah, I definitely looked over the trends that PsyOp came out with in terms of what they see coming out like more popular in the future, for sure, right? All the outcomes of working remotely, everything around, employee well-being. And I think organizations really putting a big emphasis on that, which I love. And then also too, I think given the changes with, like using all these different, digital platforms and upskilling and reskilling, a lot of companies too are starting to put more emphasis on learning. And so, but the challenges right now that I've read and I'm currently experiencing is how do we get people to want to be better and, on top of all their full-time work and doing the job. So I definitely think organizations trying to have this like learning culture, I definitely think is something too that people will continue to want to know more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Taylor?
Yeah, I think I kind of went to the same place that Rachel did with just the general like well-being and work-life balance that I think is just going to be so much more important moving forward as we just continue to understand the importance and impact of mental health and how like you spend a third of your life at work, and we can't just like let that time, be a wash or be something that is just a burden on you for your mental health. And I think that that will be a really big thing moving forward, just how organizations can, facilitate like a well-rounded life for their employees and make sure that they are, happy and healthy. And then I think will then in turn lead to better productivity, which is something that, as IO psychologists, like we have to be able to sell what we're doing, bottom line. And so luckily, I think that that's starting to become more of the norm and people aren't just going to overlook that super critical facet of being an employee.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, it looks like we have one more question before we head into our breakout rooms. So what do you think of the DE&I field? Any panelists want to speak to that, or maybe we can make that our first question for breakout rooms? Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and do breakout rooms. We can start with that, and then we'll also be adding some prompts to kind of get everybody going for the networking. And then again, feel free to add in your LinkedIn or anywhere you would like to connect with the attendees here. So I will get everybody going. Apologies. Okay, so go ahead and open the room. I'm not sure if that's working. It looks like we might be having an issue. My apologies.